These may date as far back as the 4th or 5th dynasties. No elastic, of course, no fun stripes, but soft linen, carefully woven and sometimes even dyed. Historians still argue whether these were worn in life or made just for the dead. Were these toe socks ancient Egypt's version of orthopedic slippers, or simply symbolic offerings? The debate's ongoing and probably a bit too polite for modern cable news. Let's slow things down a bit. You pass a group of scribes resting in the shade. One of them has his feet up, literally, propped on a small carved stool. He's wearing no sandals, but his feet are wrapped lightly in strips of soft linen, crisscrossed like a quiet nod to the mummy's wardrobe he'll one day wear permanently. He wiggles his toes. You're transfixed. A younger scribe beside him asks something about wrapping technique. The older one shrugs, says it's all about keeping the dust out and the skin smooth. And the wrinkles? Well, those are part of the charm. The irony? Egypt had all the raw materials to create a sock revolution centuries before anyone else did. Linen was plentiful, flax was everywhere, and the art of weaving was highly advanced. But without a societal push, like cold winters or frostbitten toes, there just wasn't a big sock movement. Still, among temple workers, priests, and the high elite, the practice of wrapping feet in linen cloth was slowly developing. A sort of proto-sock culture, quiet, understated, weirdly dignified. And while this may not sound thrilling, remember, this was a civilization that took its time with everything. Building pyramids? Thousands of years. Mummification? 70 days minimum. So naturally, inventing socks was going to be a slow burn. You duck into the shadow of a towering stone statue, your feet aching, now blistered in 3 languages. A kindly merchant offers you a piece of linen cloth, scrap material from a temple laundry, he says. Try wrapping that around your feet, he adds. It's what we use for funerals, but it works fine for errands. You hesitate, then do it, and wow. The sand's still hot, the air's still dry, but the sting is gone. It's not luxury, but it is peace. You shuffle along now with a little more grace, your feet swaddled in scraps of repurposed funeral linen, and no one seems to care. In fact, you're getting a few approving nods. Because here in ancient Egypt, linen isn't just for mummies or temples. It's sacred, stylish, and practical all at once. And as you'll soon see, it's the reason socks, as odd and gentle as they were, ever came into being here at all. Linen begins as flax, a stubborn plant that grows best in muddy soil and high sun. It's not glamorous. You've probably walked past it in a museum without noticing, unless you have a strong opinion about textiles. Which, if you're here tonight, maybe you do. And if not, well, now's your chance to care a little more than you meant to. Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere warm, but don't let that fool you into thinking it's going to be comfortable. You're trudging barefoot across the Egyptian sands around 2500 BCE and already regretting every life decision that led you to this exact moment. The sun blazes overhead like a smug overseer, and each step feels like pressing your feet onto the surface of a baked clay oven. The sand is scorching. The roads, when there even are roads, are packed hard as stone or scattered with sharp pebbles, and your heels are definitely losing a layer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Memphis, not the one with barbecue and country music, but the ancient capital of Egypt's Old Kingdom. It smells of dry mud bricks, citrus oil, maybe a whiff of something herbal. You look around and almost nobody has anything on their feet. A few priests glide by barefoot, sand and stone not bothering them at all. Meanwhile, a stonemason walks past wearing simple leather sandals with thick thongs, the kind that probably cause epic tan lines and zero arch support. You lift one foot and blow on it casually, hoping nobody notices. You're beginning to understand why a humble invention like socks, soft, quiet, forgiving, would eventually be a godsend. But here's the twist. Socks weren't a big deal in Egypt, at least not at first. That's what makes their story so interesting. You see, unlike the colder regions of Mesopotamia or later Europe, Ancient Egypt didn't need socks for warmth. Instead, it offered a uniquely awkward combination of climate and terrain: blazing sun, gritty sand, sharp rocks, and the occasional chilled temple floor. Footwear wasn't about insulation. It was about survival, ceremony, and sometimes just good hygiene. Mainstream historians generally agree that foot coverings in Egypt began with necessity. Workers on pyramids and construction sites were given rough sandals or foot wraps, essentially bits of cloth or leather tied around the soles. But these weren't socks in the way we imagine them. Think less cozy slipper and more desperate ankle bandage. The elite, however, took things to another level. Some pharaohs are buried with gold-decorated sandals, believed to aid their steps in the afterlife. That's right, gold, because if your spirit is going to wander eternity, it might as well do it in style. Now, here's where it gets weird. Archaeologists have found tiny linen coverings in tombs, what look eerily similar to socks. Some are shaped to fit the foot precisely, with little pockets for each toe. These may date as 5. The Nile provides the perfect conditions. Flax is harvested by hand, soaked in river water, and beaten until its fibers surrender into threads. These threads are spun so fine that some Egyptian linen has been described as woven air. It's cool in the heat, soft on the skin, and surprisingly durable. Ideal for clothing, shrouds, temple curtains, and feet. You sit on a shaded stone near the edge of a bustling market, watching a weaver at work. She dips her head in concentration, feet bare, but resting on a worn cloth. Her hands move rhythmically, pulling thread through loom like she's conducting a silent symphony. Children gather around to help wind spools. Nearby, a toddler toddles by with his foot wrapped clumsily in what looks like a torn napkin. You smile. It's not that Egyptians invented socks as a formal category, like, ah yes, behold, the sock. It's more that their relationship with linen was so intimate, so woven into every layer of life and afterlife, that wrapping the feet in cloth was an intuitive evolution. Of course, not everyone wore it. Linen was expensive. Weaving it required skill. But among the elite, scribes, priests, noblewomen, it was standard. And the cleaner and finer your linen, the more respected you appeared. In fact, dirty linen was such a social offense that priests were required to change several times a day. Now imagine how much attention they paid to even their foot covering. There's a fringe theory, not widely accepted but fun to imagine, that some foot wraps were infused with oils or resins, not just for preservation in tombs, but for comfort in life. Picture wrapping your tired, sand-worn feet in scented cloth laced with myrrh. Not bad, right? It's like an ancient spa treatment for your toes. And while there's no concrete proof this was widespread, the Egyptians were into perfumery and personal hygiene long before it was cool. Historians still argue whether these linen foot wraps were used daily or only ceremonially. Some believe they were reserved for rites of passage or high holidays, while others argue they were just as likely part of a bedtime routine, quiet, personal, and never mentioned outside the home. What's certain is that linen held spiritual weight. It was associated with purity, order, even the gods themselves. Some deities were said to wear nothing but the finest flax, and so when you wrapped your feet in linen, you weren't just protecting them from calluses. You were entering a sacred rhythm. You were stepping, quite literally, into harmony with the universe. Of course, none of this makes the blister on your left heel any less annoying. You rise and begin walking again, the foot wraps now warm to your skin. You pass a columned courtyard, where a young noble is being fitted for a ceremony. Her attendants smooth linen over her arms and feet, tying them with braided cords dyed in muted indigo. It's not You hear someone mutter nearby. Even her toes get better fabric than my tunic. And that's the thing. Socks, or proto-socks, in Egypt weren't about performance or style. They weren't meant to be seen. They were about care, quiet dignity, the gentle decision to soften something hard. Kind of like this bedtime story, actually. You step into a shadowed alcove near the temple gates, where a priestess is tending to votive offerings. She moves slowly, her bare feet replaced by pale cloth slippers that barely make a sound. You're not sure if she notices your wrapped feet, but she does give you the faintest of nods, a soft signal as if to say, yes, you're doing it right. And for a moment, in this linen-scented air, your feet no longer ache. You've wandered into the quieter side streets of the city now, where the breeze off the Nile hums against walls baked warm by the afternoon sun. Your feet, still cradled in linen scraps, are holding up decently well. Not perfect, but no new blisters, which, frankly, feels like a small miracle. Here, away from the palatial walls and temple rituals, life takes a slower rhythm. You see a carpenter bent over a stool, his toes poking out from fraying leather thongs. A child chases a hoop down a dusty path, feet bare and joyful. And tucked beneath an awning, an older man works steadily on something curious, a pair of sandals. Except these have soft reeds layered inside, tucked between the leather sole and foot strap. You sit nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop. The old man hums as he ties the final piece and gives the sole a test pat. For workers, he mumbles, but with kindness for their heels. You're witnessing one of the earliest iterations of the sock-adjacent invention, the padded sandal. Not quite a slipper, not a full shoe, and definitely not what you'd wear to a modern job interview, but surprisingly thoughtful for the time. The early Egyptians weren't about to knit wool booties. Wool was considered unclean, and besides, the climate wasn't crying out for anything thick or fuzzy. What they did do, however, was improvise. If the ground was rough, they stuffed their sandals. If the straps rubbed, they padded them with cloth or papyrus. If sandals weren't an option, they wrapped their feet with linen, reed fiber, or palm strips. One preserved pair of workers' sandals discovered at Deir el-Medina, a village for tomb builders, showed added padding stitched in with a kind of crude but effective proto-arch support. It may not seem revolutionary, but it speaks volumes. Someone's feet hurt, and someone else figured out how to make them hurt a little less. And honestly, that might be the purest origin of the sock. You meander farther toward the edge of a construction site. Yes, even ancient Egypt had those. Pyramid building doesn't just stop because it's a Tuesday. The air here smells of fresh-cut limestone, and workers in rough skirts, dusty from shoulder to shin, are hauling materials. Most wear open sandals. A few have wrapped feet. One particularly clever fellow has stuffed his sandal with what looks like papyrus leaves, muttering something about not bruising his heels again. There's even a man taking a break under a canvas, massaging his foot and applying a salve that smells strongly of garlic and something pungent, perhaps a folk remedy. Many believed that garlic could prevent foot swelling and even ward off infections. Historians still argue whether these makeshift balms were effective or just hopeful smears of superstition. You lean against a sun-warmed wall, watching the rhythm of labor. These men work barefoot, or nearly so, not because they prefer it, but because foot coverings cost time, material, and patience. For the average Egyptian laborer, socks weren't a priority. They were a luxury, or maybe a side project, something you invented on your own time, not company hours. Still, there's pride in the improvisation. You notice a trio of young men showing off their foot wraps during lunch, strips of linen dyed pale blue, tied with neat knots across the ankle. One of them has added beads. Beads on foot wraps. You raise an eyebrow, but they just grin, because while functionality mattered, there was always room in ancient Egypt for a little style. And yet, the fully enclosed sock still hasn't quite arrived. What you're seeing is an age of foot covering experimentation, a slow dance between practical needs and the aesthetics of linen, between sandals that slap and wraps that whisper. From your shaded perch, you watch a woman carrying water pots atop her head. Her gait is slow, purposeful, and barefoot. But as she enters a doorway, she pauses, sits on a low bench, and delicately wraps her feet in strips of what looks like reused temple linen. She does it without looking, as if it's second nature. Then she steps inside. You follow her movement with quiet curiosity. She doesn't say a word, but you've just witnessed the quiet transition between the public and private foot, a ritual that may have carried far more weight than we give it credit for. Later, when archaeologists dig through this era's remains, they'll puzzle over the odd cloth bundles and tombs. Some will dismiss them as mere bandages. Others will see the careful shaping, the tucked seams, the toe divisions, and wonder. Were these meant to protect feet from wear, or were they preparing them for a journey across sands far hotter than this? You're back on the Temple Road now, walking more confidently with each linen-wrapped step. The sun's dropped slightly, casting longer shadows over the sandstone walls. It's quieter. The city's edge has thinned into cultivated fields and palatial compounds. And soon you find yourself nearing a place you probably shouldn't be, the quarters of the high elite. But no one stops you, and that's good, because tonight you're curious about what the really important feet wore. Inside a courtyard of smooth stone and palm shade, attendants flutter like linen moths around a lounging nobleman. You try not to gawk. His sandals are not just decorated, they're a statement. Gold leaf patterns, obsidian inlays, toe loops so precise they might have been tailored. It's not even walking, just reclining while a servant oils his calves and another, yes, cleans his foot wraps. This is no casual foot situation. This is ritualized podiatry. Pharaohs and the elite treated their feet as extensions of divine status. To walk without pain was considered a blessing. To walk with style, practically sacred. Mainstream history gives us plenty of detail about pharaonic fashion, from wigs to jewelry to perfumes, but often brushes past the feet. Still, some records remain. Reliefs carved into tomb walls show sandals with curved toes, lotus motifs, and gilded straps. And occasionally, just occasionally, you'll see cloth peeking out beneath the sandals. That cloth? Probably the sock-adjacent wrap we've been following. These elite wraps were different, not improvised, not fraying at the edges. They were custom. Some were stitched to shape, others embroidered with protective symbols, ankh charms, falcons, or the Eye of Horus, thought to shield the wearer not just from blisters, but from curses. Because let's face it, if your enemies couldn't touch your heart, they might try your heels instead. You step into the edge of the servant's path, watching how carefully they handle the noble sandals. They're not merely shoes. They're objects of ceremony, privilege, and subtle flexing. One scholar even argued, gently, in a very academic tone, that elite foot coverings functioned like modern status handbags, seen, symbolic, rarely practical, and full of unspoken hierarchy. Meanwhile, across the courtyard, a priest walks by barefoot, but his soles are spotless, almost polished. He's likely just finished a foot washing ritual. Temple purity rules required cleanliness to a divine degree. In fact, priests had to shave their entire bodies, including eyebrows, and often wash their feet up to 4 times a day. And yes, they wore linen too, robes, sashes, headcloths, but occasionally they also wrapped their feet before sacred duties, particularly if the temple floors were chilled stone or if they were stepping into ritual space where sandals weren't allowed. Remember, walking barefoot on cold alabaster is only pleasant if you're not doing it for hours during sunrise ceremonies. You sneak a glance toward the priest's ankles, bare today. But nearby, hanging on a rack, are narrow strips of pale linen, neatly folded. Some even have decorative knots, practical, sure, but also artful. In a place where silence reigns, even a foot wrap can make a statement. There's a curious fresco just inside the temple wall. It shows the pharaoh Akhenaten, yes, the one with the odd artistic style, kneeling before the sun disk. His feet are uncovered, but at his side, is a servant holding what seems to be a small bundle of cloth. Historians still debate what it is. Some say it's a sash. Others think maybe it's a footwrap, prepared for later when the sun god has been honored and the stones grow cold again. Outside, the nobleman rises. With a theatrical sigh, he lets his sandals be placed delicately on his feet. Beneath the gilded leather, you catch a glimpse of white linen. Clean, crisp, fitted. You stifle a grin. Sock? Maybe not quite, but it's the closest thing this ancient world has. He walks across the courtyard with barely a sound. A child behind him, not his, probably a servant's son, tries to imitate the stride. He too wears wraps, though his are loose and streaked with dust. But still, the effort's there. There's something oddly dignified about a society where even the smallest feet get their moment. You step back, the warm stone pressing through your own linen wrappings. They've molded to your feet now, soft and comforting. You think about how far socks have come and how long they took to get here. Thousands of years later, someone will dig up one of these elite tombs and find a pair of wrapped, perfectly preserved feet. And they'll wonder, just like you did, were these socks, shoes, something in between? And somewhere in the cool hush of the past, the answer will whisper, yes. You found your way to the edge of a weaving courtyard now, less polished than the noble compounds, but filled with a quiet buzz of purpose. A few women sit cross-legged, fingers dancing through warp and weft. You hear snips of conversation, the occasional laugh, and one woman humming a tune that seems older than language. You take a seat under the shade of a sycamore fig tree, the leaves murmuring in the breeze like a half-forgotten lullaby. Then you see them. A pair of linen foot wraps folded precisely, sitting on a low stool beside one of the weavers. They're not ordinary rags. These are toe-separated, hemmed delicately at the edges. One even has a faint stitch pattern along the ankle. They don't scream fashion, they whisper intention. And it's that toe separation that makes you lean in. Because believe it or not, ancient Egyptians were early adopters of what modern sock marketers would call anatomical design. At least for the elite. And occasionally for artisans like these. Historians still argue whether these toe-divided wrappings were used for practical reasons, like reducing chafing between the toes, or ceremonial purposes, meant to mirror the mummification process where each digit was wrapped individually. One of the weavers notices your gaze and picks up the foot wrap. She gestures, then begins wrapping your left foot again, but this time with detail. She places your big toe through one slit, then carefully folds the cloth over the arch, tucking and smoothing until your foot looks like it's wearing a minimalist version of a ninja sock. The fabric is cool, whisper soft, and surprisingly secure. You wiggle your toes and immediately feel the difference. The wrapping separates your steps, softens your gait, and keeps sand from finding its favorite hiding spots between your toes. You smile, because even 3,000 years ago, someone figured this out. A child across the courtyard mimics the technique with scraps, wrapping one foot while the other remains bare. Her version's loose, flapping, and utterly perfect. Let's pause a moment to appreciate the little things. This may not be the dramatic turning point in sock history. There's no grand unveiling of the sock, now with toes, on a papyrus billboard. But in these small spaces, in weaving yards and temple floors and quiet, noble chambers, something was happening. A transition, a reconsideration of what it meant to dress the feet. Not just for function or status, but for comfort, maybe even for care. You glance at the weaver again. She's resumed her rhythm, the shuttle tapping like a heartbeat. You ask, softly, why the toe wraps? She shrugs and says, the toes are important too. If you forget one, the others complain. Ancient wisdom. Take notes. Nearby, a traveling merchant unloads his pack and presents a small roll of dyed linen, blue with faint reed motifs. Not ordinary, possibly temple offering quality. Two women haggle over it, each clearly imagining it as the next piece of clothing, or perhaps the next perfect foot wrap. There's a calm intensity to this exchange. In a world without mass production, every bit of cloth counts. Every square of linen is a choice. Will it be part of a tunic, a baby's swaddle, or maybe, just maybe, a quiet little sock? The ambient sounds grow sleepier as the sun slips westward. A dove coos from a rooftop. A spindle clinks gently to the ground. You lie back under the sycamore, staring at the woven texture of the canopy above you. Somewhere in the background, the Nile breathes in and out, steady and indifferent. And here's a little-known fact. The oldest surviving examples of true socks with separated toes were found in Egypt, dating from around the 4th century CE, so a bit later than the setting we're lounging in, but still, red wool, woven in knot-binding technique, possibly designed to be worn with sandals. A cozy mystery in crimson, which raises a delightful thought. Were these socks for walking, or simply for resting? Were they worn under the stars, or inside tombs, never meant for dirt or sweat? Historians still debate it. And that simplicity may be why Egypt never industrialized sock production the way later cultures did. They didn't need woolen mills or sock merchants. The people had linen, nimble fingers, and traditions passed from one household to the next. Besides, the very idea of mass-producing something so personal might have felt, well, strange. Picture it. You go to a market, ask for socks, and the seller hands you a pair pre-wrapped. But whose feet were they cut for? What if the heel seam's in the wrong spot? What if they smell like someone else's temple oil? No thanks. Instead, wrapping your feet became a quiet ritual, tied to seasons, social class, personal taste, and comfort. The absence of a sock industry wasn't a failure of innovation, it was a triumph of the handmade. You pass a scribal apprentice now perched on a stone ledge. He's rewrapping his own foot, a process clearly practiced, but still slightly uneven. He ties the strip just above the ankle and smirks when he sees you watching. Better than stepping on hot gravel, he mutters. You nod. It's the kind of thing you don't think about until it's too late, like sunburned earlobes or sandals that break halfway through a pilgrimage. And while we're here, the Egyptians didn't just ignore sock commerce. They also didn't rush to innovate past what worked. No zippers, no buckles, no elastic, no toe seams reinforced with goat sinew.
Instead, they made peace with imperfection. Each wrap was unique. Some were beautiful, some were frankly lumpy, but all did the job. Even today, scholars marvel at how little change occurred in Egyptian footwear over thousands of years. From the Old Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period, the basic foot philosophy remained consistent. Keep it cool, keep it light, keep it simple.
And if it frays, you rewrap. You've made your way now to the heart of one of Egypt's more mysterious spaces, a temple complex near Thebes. The architecture here swells up from the earth like it's always been part of the horizon. Massive pillars rise into shadow. Incense hangs thick in the air. Somewhere deep inside, a scribe whispers sacred text, though his voice is barely audible over the quiet shuffle of footsteps on stone. You step cautiously, feet muffled by linen. And that's the point, because now you begin to understand, perhaps more than ever, how much cold stone can change your priorities. Outside, Egypt is warmth and dust and sandals, but in here, the stone underfoot is smooth and unforgiving, chilled even in the height of the afternoon. And if you're spending hours in this space barefoot or semi-barefoot, that quiet little strip of linen between your foot and the floor suddenly becomes essential. It's a breeze drifts in, stirring the linen pile like a sigh. You imagine someone, an apprentice maybe, arriving here at dawn, selecting one of these cloths, wrapping it methodically, and stepping out onto the cold stone with a whisper instead of a slap. And this is the truth behind every quiet innovation. It starts not with a parade or proclamation, but with the question, what would make this easier? In this case, the answer was linen. Not fashionable, Not flashy, but just enough to soften the cold between sacred floors and tired feet. You step back outside into the sun. The heat floods up your legs. Your linen warms again, as if the temple's chill was just a dream. And yet, as you walk away, the wrap remains. You've crossed from ritual to routine. You're back in the heart of the city again, where the streets are alive with chatter, bargaining, laughter, and the soft thump of sandals on sun-baked earth. Now that your eyes are trained, you start to notice it everywhere. Feet wrapped in linen. Not many, but enough. In alleyways, in shaded courtyards, beneath the robes of scribes and midwives. Not the norm, but not rare either. You pass a bread vendor, her ankle loosely bound in what looks like a faded temple cloth. One end drags slightly behind her heel, dusted in flour. She smiles and says something about the bakery being too cold in the mornings. The stones bite, she adds. So I wrap my feet before the dough. You nod, because you get it now. This isn't about fashion or even status. It's about comfort, a quiet form of resistance against the small indignities of daily life. The wrap says, my feet matter too. You head toward the riverbank, where the day's heat has mellowed into something golden and forgiving. There's a group of fishermen tending their nets. Most of them are barefoot, but one older man, clearly the respected sort, the one they all listen to, has a linen strip tied neatly around each foot, knotted between the toes, just tight enough to stay in place, but loose enough for the river's edge. Slippery stones, he says when he catches you staring. The fish aren't the only ones who slide. It's a joke, but also a lesson. Even here on the edge of the Nile, the sock makes a quiet cameo. Nearby, a boy drags a fishing basket behind him, clearly too big for the job. He pauses, wipes his forehead, and picks a reed splinter from between his toes. You watch as he pulls a strip of cloth from his belt, spits on it, classic, and begins wrapping one foot. Crudely, yes, but with determination. There it is again, the spark of invention. Not handed down, not taught in school, just remembered, copied, guessed. Because foot wraps weren't taught in textbooks, they were lived. Historians often forget these little acts of daily improvisation. The archaeological record loves tombs and temples,